Have you ever found yourself sitting quietly, staring at the phone, wondering why it hasn't rung? Not from a telemarketer or a doctor's office, but from someone who truly matters. Your son, your daughter. You know they're out there, living their lives, maybe even just a few miles away, but somehow, the silence between you feels 1,000 miles wide. And yet, you have this odd sense they're still watching. Maybe you notice that little seen checkmark when you post something online. Maybe a neighbor says they ran into your daughter at the store and she asked how you were. Or maybe you just have that deep, gut-level knowing that they're still keeping tabs on you, even if they haven't picked up the phone in weeks. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Many parents, especially in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, experience this strange distance with their adult children. They're not gone. They're not ignoring you completely. But they're not really showing up either. It's like they're in your orbit but never landing. Today, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why your children silently observe you, but rarely, if ever, initiate contact. This isn't just a parenting topic. It's emotional, it's personal, and for many of us, it's painful. But there's truth here. Truth that can set you free, change how you see things, and maybe, just maybe, bring some peace back into your heart. First, let's look at something that might surprise you. Your child is addicted to observing, not acting. That might sound like a strange word, addicted. But think about how the world has changed. We live in an age of social media, online updates, and passive connections. People can feel close just by watching someone's pictures, reading their posts, or hearing about them from others. But that's not real closeness, is it? That's not presence. That's not a hug, a call, a "how are you really doing, mom?" For your child, though, especially if they're feeling overwhelmed, guilty, or unsure how to talk to you, observing from a distance is easier. It's safe. They can scroll through your Facebook, see you're still gardening, still cooking your Sunday roast, still standing strong, and tell themselves, "Okay, mom's fine. I don't need to call today." And then that turns into a week, then a month, and eventually silence becomes the habit. But here's the thing. That habit doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean they've stopped caring. It just means they're stuck in the cycle of watching without acting, consuming your presence without giving theirs in return. And the truth is, this kind of behavior gives them a false sense of connection. It lets them avoid difficult feelings. Maybe they feel guilty for not visiting enough. Maybe they're afraid you'll bring up old hurts. Or maybe they just don't know how to relate to you now that they're older. So instead of reaching out, they watch, quietly, from a distance. And you're left holding the silence. Now that brings me to something even deeper, and it might hit a little harder. Sometimes your child fears losing control more than losing connection with you. Let that sit for a moment. Because as a parent, you've likely spent decades being the one in charge, setting the rules, making the decisions, sacrificing, guiding. And now the roles have shifted. They've grown up, they've got careers, families, bills of their own. And deep down, they may not want to feel like a child around you anymore. Reaching out can feel to them like stepping back into a role they've been trying to grow out of. They may worry that if they call, if they show up, you'll tell them what to do or how to raise their kids, or that they're not visiting enough. So they pull back. Not because they want to hurt you, but because they want to protect their independence, their control. They may not even realize they're doing it, but it happens all the time. A daughter who avoids her mother's calls not out of anger, but out of fear, she'll feel judged. A son who watches from afar because he wants to know his parents are okay, but not if it means feeling like a little boy again. And again, you're left in the quiet. But here's something important I want you to hear. This isn't about your worth as a parent. This isn't proof you did something wrong. In fact, it often means the opposite. You were so strong, so guiding, so reliable, that now they feel unsure how to engage with you as equals. That transition from parent and child to adult and adult is not easy. And a lot of children never quite figure it out. So instead, they fall back on the one thing they can control: distance. They tell themselves that watching is enough, that checking in through others is okay, that no news is good news. But inside, they're just as conflicted, just as unsure, just as emotional. And if you're sitting there wondering, do they even think about me? I want you to know, they do. But thoughts aren't actions. Love isn't always loud, and caring doesn't always come with a knock at the door. So what do you do with all this? How do you live in that strange space where your child sees you but doesn't speak to you, misses you but doesn't say it? You begin by recognizing that this silence isn't always rejection. It's often reflection of their fear, their uncertainty, their desire to protect their autonomy, even if it hurts the connection with you. And while that doesn't make the loneliness go away, it can make it feel a little less personal, a little less like abandonment, and a little more like human struggle. Because here's the reality. Just as you're figuring out how to age gracefully, to find meaning in your later years, they're trying to figure out how to hold on to their own identity while still being a son or daughter. It's messy, it's real, and it doesn't always come with answers. But it can come with compassion, with understanding, and sometimes with a quiet kind of healing. So next time you feel that sting, that ache of being unseen, pause, take a breath, and remind yourself, being watched doesn't mean being unloved. Sometimes it means your child doesn't yet know how to show up, but still wants to know you're okay. And that might be the beginning of a new kind of closeness. One that doesn't demand or chase or beg, but gently invites. And maybe in that quiet space, something else begins to shift, not just in how you see them, but in how you see yourself. Because here's something many parents forget, especially later in life. You're still shaping the dynamic, even in the silence, even when they're not calling, even when it feels like they've slipped away emotionally. You still have influence, not by trying to pull them back, but by standing strong in who you are. That brings us to something subtle, but powerful. The person who appears less emotionally reactive often shapes the relationship. And right now, that might be your child. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I'm not playing games. I just want to hear from them. That's not power, that's love. And you're right, it is. But in many cases, the one who seems like they care less ends up with more emotional control. And unfortunately, that dynamic often leads the other person, usually the parent, to tiptoe, overthink, and hold back their own feelings in fear of pushing them further away. You don't want to guilt them. You don't want to nag. You don't want to bring up the distance because you're afraid that might only make things worse. So you stay quiet. You try to be understanding. You hope that maybe, just maybe, if you don't make a fuss, they'll come around. But silence, left unchecked, starts to feel like permission. It tells your child, this is okay. This space between us, it's normal now. And that can be a dangerous place for a relationship to sit in. Now let me be clear, I'm not telling you to demand attention or force closeness. That rarely works. But I am saying this, don't mistake emotional stillness for strength. Being honest, gently, calmly, and without blame, can be powerful. Sometimes saying, I miss you, I'd love to hear from you more often, without making it a guilt trip, is enough to stir something inside them. But what's even more powerful is what you don't do. That's right. Sometimes your absence, your emotional absence, is louder than anything you could ever say. And that might be the hardest part to accept. Because you've spent your entire life showing up, showing love, showing support. So stepping back, even just a little, feels unnatural. It feels wrong. But there comes a point when pulling back is not rejection, it's protection. It's about giving both of you space to feel the impact of what's missing. Because here's what most people don't realize, absence carries more weight than words ever could. When you stop texting first, when you stop liking every photo, when you don't answer right away, or send that just checking in message out of habit, it creates a silence they can feel. It gives them room to wonder, to notice the gap, to ask themselves, why hasn't mom called this week? I haven't heard from dad in a while. That wondering, that quiet discomfort. It's not a bad thing. It's a natural part of how relationships grow, especially when one person has been doing all the emotional lifting. Now, of course, I'm not talking about playing games. This isn't about withholding love to get back at them. This is about giving the relationship room to breathe, to reset, to let them feel what your presence really means by showing them what your absence feels like. And sometimes, that's the only way they truly recognize your value. Because let's face it, we often don't appreciate what's steady, what's always there, until it's not. Until the text doesn't come. Until the Sunday dinner invitation isn't extended. Until they start scrolling through their photos and realize how long it's been since they saw your smile in person. That absence, it speaks. And when it does, it starts to crack through the assumptions they've built. The belief that you'll always be there, no matter how far they drift. That your love is guaranteed, so they don't have to work for it. But even unconditional love deserves respect. Even unwavering support deserves to be noticed. You're not asking for the world. You're asking to be seen, to be heard, to be part of their lives in a meaningful way. And if that isn't happening, then it's okay to take a step back. You're not less of a parent for doing that. You're more. You're strong enough to protect your heart while still keeping it open. And here's something that might surprise you. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop overextending, that's when the energy shifts. Suddenly, they're the ones wondering. They start checking your page. They start thinking, have they moved on? Do they still care? Why haven't I heard from them? It's in that pause, in that unexpected silence, that reflection begins. And maybe, just maybe, it leads to something honest. A message, a call, a visit, or even just a softening in their heart. But if it doesn't, you still haven't lost. Because you've reclaimed something powerful, your peace. Now here's a truth that may be difficult, but necessary to say out loud. If your child truly wanted to be there, they would be. No schedule is too busy. No excuse is too valid. People make time for who matters to them. And yes, I know, it's complicated. Life is busy. People are juggling work, kids, marriages, struggles you may not see. But underneath all of that, when someone really wants to connect, they do. Even if it's a short call. Even if it's a card. Even if it's just, I miss you, Mom, in a text. That effort, it comes from the heart. So if it's not coming, maybe it's not about time or logistics or forgetfulness. Maybe it's about priorities. And that's hard to face. But it's freeing too. Because when you stop waiting for someone to show up in a way they won't or can't, you stop setting yourself up for disappointment. You stop wondering what you did wrong. And you start building a life that isn't dependent on someone else's emotional crumbs. You start giving yourself the very thing you've always wanted from them: attention, love, respect. That could mean deepening friendships, taking up something new, writing letters, joining a local group, or simply waking up each day knowing that you matter, with or without someone else's validation. Your value isn't determined by how often your phone rings. It's in who you are, what you've lived through, what you still have to offer this world. So don't measure your worth by their silence. Measure it by your resilience, your wisdom, your ability to keep loving, even when it's not returned the way you hoped. Because in the end, you're not here just to be watched. You're here to be fully alive. And yes, maybe there's a part of you that still wishes things were different. That your child would call just to say, I love you, not because they need something or because it's a holiday, but simply because they missed your voice. That they'd show up at your door just to sit and talk, like they used to, without the rush or the noise. It's okay to want that. It's human. It's loving. But wanting that connection doesn't mean you have to wait in pain for it. You can hold the hope without holding your breath. Because the truth is, Love doesn't always come in the way we expect or even deserve. And when it doesn't, we're left with a choice. We can either chase it, hoping it circles back, or we can turn towards something deeper. Our own healing, our own peace, our own strength. And here's something I want you to carry with you as you move forward. You were never meant to be someone's background noise. You are not a silent movie playing while they scroll past. You are a soul worth listening to, a presence worth showing up for, a parent with a story and a heart and a voice. And you don't have to shrink just because someone else has gone quiet. Now, let's go back to something we said earlier, that your child may still be watching. Watching your social media, hearing about you from others, remembering holidays, birthdays, recipes, songs. You live in their memory, whether they admit it or not. But when someone chooses to stay in the shadows, instead of walking beside you, that's not connection. That's comfort. That's control. And here's what I hope sinks in, maybe for the first time. Nothing haunts a person more than the one they can no longer reach. Not because you vanished, but because you chose peace over pursuit. You stopped explaining. You stopped apologizing. You stopped performing for a relationship that wasn't showing up. And that silence carries a weight, a message, a mirror. Because when you disappear from their emotional routine, when you no longer fill the gaps with check-ins, when you stop being predictable, they start asking the questions you used to ask. Are they okay? Do they miss me? Why haven't I heard from them? Suddenly, the silence they use to hand you so easily becomes uncomfortable, heavy. They scroll through your photos longer than they'd like to admit. They look at your smile and wonder who you've become without them. And maybe they'll never tell you that, but they feel it. Because your absence, when chosen from strength, not spite, is a powerful teacher. It doesn't punish. It reflects. It says, I still love you, but I love me too. It says, I'm still here, but I'm not chasing anymore. It says, I'm open, but I'm not waiting in the hallway forever. That's not distance. That's dignity. And that's something no one can take from you. Not time, not silence, not even the child you raised with your whole heart. So where does that leave you today? Maybe you're sitting with a little more clarity. Maybe your heart feels just a little lighter knowing this isn't just your experience, that many, many parents are walking this same quiet path. Some days it aches. Other days it strengthens you. But either way, you're not alone. And if you're wondering whether you're still a good parent because your child doesn't reach out, let me remind you of something. Your love was never measured by how often they called. It was in the meals you made without being asked. The nights you stayed up worrying. The bills you paid even when it stretched your limits. The birthdays you remembered. The forgiveness you gave. The cheering from the sidelines. The small, quiet sacrifices nobody saw. That was love. That still is love. But now it's time to give some of that love back to yourself. Maybe that looks like calling an old friend just to laugh again. Maybe it's joining a class, taking a walk, starting a new book, planting a garden, painting a picture, or singing out loud without caring who hears. Maybe it's finally writing the stories you've lived through. Or maybe it's simply waking up tomorrow, pouring your morning coffee, and deciding, I'm not waiting anymore. Today, I live. And if your child comes back around, if the phone rings, or the message pops up, or the knock comes at the door, greet them with grace. But don't hand them your peace. Don't trade your healing just to prove you're still available. Let them earn their place in your life again, gently, honestly. Because you are no longer the one reaching across the silence just to keep the bond alive. You are the one who found peace in the quiet. And here's the beautiful part. When you reclaim your peace, your dignity, your voice, you give them the space to finally see you clearly. Not as the always available parent, not as the backup plan, but as a person. A whole, full person with depth and value and boundaries. And sometimes, that's what wakes them up. So if you've made it this far in the video, I want to thank you. I know these aren't easy things to hear, but I believe, truly, that truth is not meant to hurt. It's meant to heal. And if anything in this message touched your heart, gave you a sense of peace, or made you feel just a little more seen, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your story. Share your strength. Because chances are, someone out there needs to know they're not alone either. If this message helped you, please consider clicking like. That tiny gesture helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. And if you'd like to see more uplifting, real, and powerful content like this, subscribe to the channel Strong Elderly Life. We're building a community here, a place where your voice matters, your story matters, and your growth never stops. And remember this, always, silence is not the end of your story. It's just the space where a new chapter can begin. Here's to living your best life at any age. And never forgetting, you are still worthy of love, connection, and peace. Always.